Okay. Elements point of view. It's our reasoning is done from some point of view. Identify your point of view, seek others' point of view, and identify the strengths as well as the weakness. Strives to evaluate all points, and the point of view is literally the place from which you view something. It includes what you are looking at and what you're seeing it, and and sorry, and what you're seeing it. Here is here you make sure you understand the limitations of your point of view and that you fully consider other relevant viewpoints. Here you ask yourself questions of, for example, what exactly am I focused on? And another question could be, or how am I looking at this situation? So that's it on my part.
Okay. I have the purpose. So all reasoning has a purpose. Your purpose is your goal, your objective, and essentially what you're trying to accomplish. We also use this term to include functions, motives, and intentions. We want to make sure that you take time to state your purpose clearly and ensure that the purpose is justifiable. You make sure that you distinguish your purpose from related purposes. You checked often to make sure that you are still on target, that you're staying on topic and being consistent with the purpose. Choose significant and realistic purposes. They need to be sensible and practical. And some questions that target purposes are if what the purpose is doing, what is the objective of the assignment, whether it's a task, job, experiment, strategy. Should we question or refine or modify the purpose, which is the goal? And what is the purpose of education? I also have the information. So it's all reasoning is based on data, information, and evidence. Information includes the facts, the data, the evidence, or experiences we use to figure out solutions. It doesn't necessarily imply accuracy or correctness. The information you should be accurate and relevant to the question or issue that is addressed. Some key points are you need to make sure that you restrict your claims to those supported by the data. Search for information that opposes your position as well as information that supports it. And be sure that you've gathered sufficient information. And then some questions that target information are, what information do I need to answer this question? What data is relevant to this problem? And do we need to gather more information?
So our thought processes lead us to raise questions. We use these questions as a guide when considering a problem or an issue. Clarity and precision is important when thinking about what to ask. Expressing questions in different ways can help thoughts become more clear. Ask yourself, what am I trying to answer? What important questions surround my main issue? Is this question clear? What kind of question is this? Is it philosophical, scientific? And lastly, how can I answer this question?
Okay, I'm going to go over concepts as well as the correlation between interpretation and inference. First, I'll discuss concepts. The definition of concepts is an abstract idea or a general notion. Concepts can include theories, laws, ideas, principles, definitions, but they're not limited to that, and they encompass much more than that. Concepts are the fundamental building blocks to our thinking, and here are a few questions that you can ask yourselves when using conceptual thinking. You can ask yourself, what do I mean by the term blank? Could I simply explain this concept? For if you could simply explain a concept, then it shows your true understanding of it. And another question when looking at the conceptual thinking of others, as in a speaker or an author, you can ask yourself, what idea or concept is this author or speaker trying to use? As for inference and interpretations, inference is basically the act of questioning other things and other concepts. When you're inferencing or inferring something, you're basically challenging that thought or idea. But when you infer something, you also are focusing on a conclusion to that thought. And interpretation is the action of explaining or meaning the meaning of that thought. Some questions to ask yourself when inferring a concept is, what conclusions am I coming to? And is my inference logical, and does it relate to the topic?
So my section was assumptions. Assumptions are beliefs you take for granted. They usually operate at the subconscious or unconscious level of thought. So my take on it was that just because a student might come from a different background or cultural background doesn't mean that they don't want to be a good student, or you can't assume that all students learn the same way. You have to figure out a good comprehensible input that so that all students can understand. And also, you can't assume negatively about a student from the start, because it can affect their performance. So when you already have low expectations of a student, just because they come from a low income family, you know, their performance is going to be low. And so one of the scenarios from one of the modules was saying that a teacher felt frustrated because a student was showing up late to class, or the student's parents never called back, or they would try to reach out to the parents and they just weren't involved. So they felt like the student didn't really care about their education, and that's what the teacher assumed. But come to find out, the mother was working overtime, the dad is on night shift, the student had to make dinner for the younger siblings and get them to bed. So the things you can do about not making assumptions is get to know your students, and don't just assume they don't care. So some of the questions you can ask about assumptions is, what am I assuming or taking for granted? Am I assuming something I shouldn't? And another one is, what assumption is leading me to this conclusion? So it's just best not to make assumptions. Make sure you get to know your students first.
Okay, and in conclusion, I have implications and consequences. Implications are claims or truths that logically follow from other claims or truths. An example question for that would be, what are you implying when you say that? Consequences follows from actions. So I guess in a classroom setting, the consequence could be, in a classroom setting, is a result of like breaking a rule. An example that I gave from that is, two students are talking as a teacher is giving instruction, and a consequence of that, of them breaking a rule, would be to separate them, like into the end of the class or until the lecture is complete. And I also read that as a conclusion, with all of the elements, all reasoning leads somewhere or has some implications and consequences.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah.